I guarantee by the end of my talk, at some point, you're going to say, what? Have these nerdy NASA engineers been watching too many episodes of Star Trek? They're talking about personal flight? I don't know about that. But I want you to get past the daily grind and what you've been programmed to accept as normal and start thinking about the future technology frontiers. And I literally want to take you on an exploration of a new technology frontier over these next few minutes. And if I can't convince you that the future of, well, the next generation is going to accept personal flight just as much as you accept an automobile, at least let me influence this in your life. And that is that there's incredible opportunities in the new frontiers. I mean, that's where dreams can take place because there's a lot less rules, there's a lot less entrenchment, there's low-hanging fruit. Opportunities exist in the frontiers. But you got to know there's a lot of people shooting arrows on frontiers as well. And so you got to realize that 99% of the things that you do on a frontier is going to fail. But that 1%, if you're on a frontier, could change the world. And in a way, that's kind of what we're trying to do. Actually, you know, you're involved in a technology frontier right now, whether you like it or not. In fact, I'll bet that each one of you have a frontier technology in your pocket. And that's right here. I mean, can you imagine? Come on, go back 20 years. The idea of having on-demand communication, on-demand navigation and weather, on-demand information from any source on the planet Earth, basically, in your pocket for a few $100s at your disposal. I mean, that's incredible. It would have been crazy to talk about such a capability 20, 30 years ago, right? Well, let's take that one next step. I mean, sure, data bytes are really useful, you know, for a lot of things, but wouldn't it be really cool if we could take the next step? And instead of just on-demand information, we could have on-demand access to things with mass. People and goods could have on-demand travel capability that's much, much faster than what we have today. Well, that's what we're going to talk about. But it's really useful to look at the past, right, before you look into the future. And that is, if you look 100 years ago, actually they were on a technology frontier. And they went from horse and cart to this new devil wagon that came out. That's the exact description that they used at the time because these were expensive, noisy, rich boys' toys that didn't pertain to the public, so they didn't like them because they weren't getting any benefit from them. So, and they scared the horses. So, I mean, they're actually a negative influence. But they could get you around at about 3 miles per hour. So, you know, your yearly mobility reach was about 1,000 miles. You stayed pretty close to home. And, you know, the other existing technology was the locomotive, which could go about 25 miles per hour average speed. So it's still, you didn't get a lot of traveling because your mobility was limited based on the technology that was available. Well, along came this incredible technology frontier of the automobile. And if you look at, Horatio Nelson was the first person to drive across the country from San Francisco to New York. There's no paved roads back then. But you look at where we've come in 100 years. I mean, I know some people, you may not like the congestion that exists, but has the automobile made our life better? It has. Today, we're up to really, we've pushed this technology really as far as we could in society, right? We're up to 250 million cars just in the United States alone. Maybe it's time for a new technology frontier to help us out. So at the same time, you had this incredible new additional technology frontier happen. And that's the cool thing about frontiers and technology frontiers is they tend to coalesce. You don't just have one, but you have several that drive each other. And because of the advancement in internal combustion engines, lo and behold, all of a sudden we could not only be on wheels, but we could be up in the air. And in 100 years, boom, we get to this incredible capability where it is second nature for us to go across the country and do it quite affordably. The aircraft has united the world in a way that never existed before. So you take these two technology frontiers, you put them together, and over the last 100 years, instead of going around for on-demand travel when we want, and with us being in charge, instead of 3 miles per hour, now we're up to an average speed of about 33 miles per hour. 10 times better, right? Likewise, with the centralized or scheduled type of service, 10 times better than the locomotive. What an incredible enabling technology, right? I mean, all of a sudden we can go when we want, where we want. But you know, still, 33 miles per hour, is that what the next 100 years have in store for us? Are we stuck here? Or, I mean, are automobiles all of a sudden going to be traveling much faster on the ground, especially in that kind of congestion? I don't think so. I think we need a new technology frontier if we're going to keep expanding mobility to even more places. So you've got, on one hand, automobiles that do an incredible job at short distance travel, right? Nothing's going to go be more convenient for the 5-mile trip. If you're going to go 2,000 miles, nothing's going to be as good as an airline. But what about all the trips in the middle? And there's a lot of them. In fact, most of the time, you're traveling somewhere in between, whether it's 25 miles, 50, 100 miles. You see the distribution of trips, and the shorter the trips, the higher it goes. But it's interesting to note, airlines, people don't even really start flying on airlines until it's at least a 500-mile trip. Well, because there's a lot of overhead, right? Not baggage, but there's a lot of burden in taking airlines, right? So you got to drive to the airport, you got to go through security, and by the time you do all that, for instance me, instead of flying to Charlotte, I'd rather drive 4 to 5 hours so I can stay in control. Well, the interesting thing is there's no transportation options for us in these middle trips. Nothing. And, you know, if you really want to achieve a breakthrough capability for us in terms of mobility, we need some new solutions. Now, I want to share with you this one interesting mobility truth or transportation truth, which is from a study from MIT, which is really interesting because essentially what it says is no matter how much money you make, it's human nature to be willing to travel about an hour and 15 minutes a day. Whether you live in Africa and you're walking, whether you live in Japan and you're using high-speed rail, whether you're in the United States with cars, doesn't matter. Across decades of different technologies, across all different types of societies, people are basically willing to travel an hour and 15 minutes today. That's what they tend to do. Well, what could you do? You know, if instead of, okay, so here we are in Charlotte. Hopefully you can see that. And this is your mobility reach. So we've got an automobile with an average speed of 33 miles per hour. So essentially your mobility reach in any given day is 50 miles. That's what you would tend to be comfortable traveling with. Well, I mean, that gives you a nice little region around Charlotte, so you can go up to Lake Norman and live there if you want. But what about the whole rest of the state? You know, I mean, they don't have a Charlotte airport sitting them providing accessibility. They have to drive a long way to get that. Well, what if? Let's just ask a what if, exploration kind of question. What if you could have a new transportation device that could go 4 times faster with the average speed? All of a sudden, instead of having a mobility reach of just the area around Charlotte, essentially your mobility reach increases to half the state of North Carolina. Well, I mean, that's an incredible opportunity for all these rural areas that have been left behind, right? As we've become more and more modern, what about all these vast resources in the United States that aren't around a city? And that's why there's a really interesting choice that we have in America. And Americans really seem to love freedom, so it's going to be a difficult choice. And that is, do we try to build highways everywhere and continue to have urban sprawl, or do we do what the Europeans do and collapse into big cities with essentially nothing out in the country? Or is there another solution that a technology frontier can provide where we can have that mobility reach that's much bigger than just around that little area with considerable congestion? Well, personal flight, that gets us to personal flight. So essentially, this is probably what you think of personal flight, right? 99% of you don't fly a small aircraft, don't get any benefit from a small aircraft, so you think that they're noisy, stinky, and expensive vehicles that don't pertain to you. Well, guess what? You're right. They burn leaded fuel, they make a lot of noise, they're very difficult to use in terms of training time and cost. So I understand if you don't love aircraft the way I love aircraft. And it's been interesting because over the last 100 years, even all the way back to the Wright brothers, even the Wright brothers said there's going to be a time when aircraft are part of people's daily lives. And there's been a lot of attempts, from a CRX that's bolted on to wings and a tail, and they try to fly that CRX, to the aero car. I mean, you name it. There's been lots and lots of dreams trying to be fulfilled. Well, actually, I guess that example shows not all dreams should be fulfilled, right? But if the capability is really going to give you something outstanding, like the ability to live and work and do business in a huge area that's 16 times more land area than you had access to before, well, that's a pretty cool capability that's worth seeking. Just don't do it with a jet bug. So the question is, what technology frontiers can try to fulfill this dream? Is it a dream worth fulfilling? I think it is, because it will have the potential to radically improve our life, just as when we went from horse and carriage to the automobile. Now, you may not have heard of this, but just 2 weeks ago, there was a major event, and that is the largest aviation prize of all time was awarded for the Green Flight Challenge. NASA put up a $1.35 million prize, and we had some incredible aircraft. These are electric aircraft, the world's most efficient aircraft that achieve essentially twice the efficiency of a Prius at twice the speed that a Prius can go. So, I mean, that's incredibly efficient. So, one of these breakthrough frontier technologies is electric propulsion. It completely changes the rules on how we can develop aircraft. So, another really cool technology frontier that's also showing up is autonomous vehicles. And what you're seeing here with this video is essentially these vehicles have all these sensors that you see on them, and DARPA essentially paid for these advanced sensor systems. But they're essentially scanning out. They're shooting out a laser that doesn't harm your eyes, and it essentially gives the vehicle the information to know where it is. Well, if you look at this vehicle down in the center picture on the left, it may just look like a Prius with a little thing on the roof. That's actually the Google autonomous car. And they've taken all these cumbersome sensors and integrated them into a much simpler system. And literally you have a car driving around itself with just the person there as a safety system to back up the autonomy. In the state of Nevada, it's already passed legislation to permit these type of vehicles. Autonomous cars are coming. And if you think, it's a lot harder to do autonomous cars than it is to do autonomous aircraft, because up in the sky we don't have kids jumping out, dogs jumping out, deer running across the highway. There's nothing up there. But there's 3 dimensions to work with, which are great, much better than a one-dimensional, ant line that everybody's got to stay in, right? So, and GM also, they just have shown the ENV, which is another autonomous electric car. So there's an incredible frontier where autonomy, robotics, will be coming into our lives. So Essentially, they're coming into a couple new markets. One is right here. You see two little you saw a quadcopter flying before. Well, these quadcopters can actually do juggling. So they're bouncing a ball between them, and you go, oh my gosh. I mean, to me, that's one of the coolest things that I've seen them do. Well, they're going to do a lot more cool things in the future. And you may think of unmanned aerial vehicles as military weapon systems. Forget that. Take off the blinders. They are going to change the world in the next 20 years as they start to become into civil uses. They are going to be small, 5 to 10 pounds. They're going to be the equivalent of robotic birds. You're going to have every lifeguard station have the equivalent of a robotic pelican that can fly over, look down, see where there's a distressed swimmer under the water where a lifeguard couldn't see it, or sharks coming or whatever. You're going to have little hummingbirds 20 years from now that can follow your kid to school to make sure he's okay and telling you what he's doing. I mean, you name it. But these are going to be incredible civil applications for really useful things that make our life better, just like this does. Think of them as flying iPhones that give you that same kind of wonderful kind of connection with everybody else and what everything else is going on in the world. Well, that brings to my last topic. The other market frontier. All the same technologies from unmanned aerial vehicles are going to show up here, personal air vehicles, where you're going to have vehicles that require very limited infrastructure. You don't have to go to the airport anymore. Incredibly efficient with electric propulsion. Zero or very low emissions with electric propulsion. Easy to use. We're developing a system that's sort of like a horse and rider relationship, where the vehicle has a level of intelligence, the user has a level of intelligence, and when you put them together, they're complementary, and they're safer than either one could be by itself. Just like a horse. Come on, you can get on a horse, right, and ride it. The horse knows where the barn is. It knows where the path is. It's going to be very, very easy to use. Equal safety to the car. Another cool thing about electric systems, we can make them redundant. So there is no such thing as a propulsion system failure. Ultra low noise, we're developing low tip speed propellers that make it from 250 feet away, you can't even hear them. All these cool features that give you fast, on-demand, distributed access that all of a sudden open up all these rural areas that right now aren't accessible and have been left behind in a time period of 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. It's not about one vehicle, so don't start poking holes. Oh, I don't like that vehicle. It's about a bunch of vehicles. And what I'm trying to get you warmed up for is the fact is, within the next couple of years, you're going to start seeing these. And I know it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable the first time you see one. Flying all by itself, autonomously with electric motors and batteries. It's okay. It's going to be really useful to you, and it's going to be affordable. So, consider the possibilities. And again, it's not just about personal aircraft. It's about having choices in transportation that make our lives better. High-speed rail, yes, absolutely, but only where it makes sense. And that it only makes sense in highly populated areas where you can afford to do it economically. 2015 Prius, yes. Great new airlines, yes, but we need more choice in transportation, and we need to open up the vast resources that exist in the United States. So I'll just finish it up with this, and that is, if you like dreams, I love dreams. Embrace new frontiers, because that's where dreams can come true. That's where they turn into reality. Dreams require risk. Frontiers have a lot of risk. But if you choose an objective that's worth getting there, if that what-if question is so compelling, then don't give up. And ridiculous things like a Star Trek communicator that Gene Roddenberry thought up 40 years ago and was thought of as ridiculous, we have something way better than that now. It can happen. And it's really not a question of technology, it's a question of when you're ready for it, when society can accept it. Thank you very much for your time.